There are times where you kind of take a step back to look at what is driving you, what is your vision, what is your purpose, right? I always say to myself, purpose is bigger than maybe my ego or something. Me, for instance, my purpose has always been to help uplift Africa, making Africans proud of where they are from, making it a choice where people would jack backwards. Sometimes how far you can go out of your immediate network to raise funding would also inform you or give you insights into how people connect with that problem. It's a problem that is very unique to your local community. Chances are maybe you might just raise funding from people who are from the community, maybe one or two who think that problem is big enough. But oftentimes, yeah, you also get a sense of how people view the problem and all that. So, and at the end of the day, sometimes fundraising is also storytelling. Right? You tell a story that people can connect with, right? So it's not just you might have a great idea, but if you're not able to tell a compelling story, people might not be buy into it. So
So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are watching from. Thank you so much for choosing to watch this episode. You picked the right episode to watch because today's episode is taking a little bit of a different format. Usually, I interview entrepreneurs, startups, people that have businesses. But today, I have someone that has the unique position of wearing two caps, i.e., he is conversant with investing, but he also has started his own startup himself. So, without much further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to my guest today to introduce himself and to tell us why today is an episode that is a must watch for anybody who is interested in starting a business.
thanks so much, Bumi, and hi everyone. Glad to be on this show. My name is Charles Nweke. Like Bobby said, I've come a long way. I find myself in this space where I wear double hats. On one side, work with a catalyst fund, an investment company, VC in pre-seed stage climate tech, clean tech companies. On the other hand, I'm a founder, right? I founded a company called AlumUnite, where we help drive funding towards education in a sustainable way. So yeah, that's it about me.
Okay, fantastic. So let me ask you an easy question. Let's start off with something easy. Which cap do you prefer the most? Being an investor or being a founder?
It depends. It depends. Yeah, I mean, there are times where you kind of take a step back to look at what is driving you, what is your vision, and what is your purpose, right? I always say to myself, sometimes for me the purpose is bigger than maybe my ego or something like that, and all that, right? So sometimes as an investor you see yourself being able to reach that purpose. If for me, for instance, my purpose has always been to help uplift Africa and the global south in terms of empowering their people, making Africans proud of where they are from, making it a choice where people would jack backwards and not upwards, right?
Forward.
So those are the kind of things that for me I feel is the purpose, right? So it's bigger than me to do, and if that comes through investing, then yes, it's fine. I'm happy to help see that through, as an investor. If that comes through building, then I also say to myself, I will do it. So in which case, I tend to build things that I see no one else willing to build, or people do not see as too risky. So those are where I tend to build. I'm not one who usually build things that I see a quick buck to make and without. So if anything, I usually scare myself. I shift away from areas that are roads that are taken by many, right? So I'm usually one that will go a different routes, and usually one not taken ahead of me. So yeah, like I said, for me the purpose is usually bigger, and that drives the preference. So sometimes as an investor, other times as a founder. But then the thing with a founder is you can typically not do many. You can only do so much, right?
Yeah.
So there are so many ideas I have had to just put on the side. I thought they were great ideas. In some cases, even started, but just decided, no, there's only so much as a founder you can do. that's the difference, right? So as an investor, you're a bit able to reach further than the founder. But I think oftentimes the founder, the reward you get, from the hard days and all that, as a founder, probably is a bit more fulfilling, if I put it that way. And yeah, it's can be grueling as well. More grueling, more fulfilling.
Okay. And because you wear two caps, how has that affected your perspective when investing? As in, has it made you more empathetic or more understanding of a founder's perspective or his idea when appraising an investment, a potential one?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I guess from as an investor on the investor side, like you see founders where you're sort of empathetic around, this is their work, this is their life work. They've put in a lot of time, a lot of sweat into it. Yes, you might not invest for various reasons, either because one, it's not aligned with your thesis area, or two, you don't believe that the idea of business can grow at the scale which would generate likely returns. But that doesn't mean that you don't sort of appreciate what they're doing and sort of encourage them, give them a pat on the back, and where possible as well, give them some feedback, some ideas on how they can actually improve what they do. So I think for me, that's definitely has helped. And on the other hand, as well, I think it's also allowed me to sort of take that perspective that sometimes founders may not have it figured out yet. So when evaluating a founder, evaluate from the point of perspective of, if this founder were to figure it out, what would they achieve versus where are they right now? So there are times where we see opportunities and we say, maybe this founder hasn't thought about this and this. They are going about it the hard way, yet they made this strides. We think they could potentially unlock X, Y, Z, if they go about it so that way. So they might be sitting on something that is maybe is even more has more potential that they currently see, right? So those are things that we also look at as well. That sometimes is backed by your experience, is backed by different factors. Yeah.
Okay, and in your line of work, I know you must have come across many founders, many ideas. So, what kind of trends do you see? What are some of the good ideas that you've seen, or where you think the world is tending towards, especially for people that haven't started a business but are looking for ideas that they think can scale?
Well, I mean, if I could say the good ideas, then I guess sometimes you might argue they're no longer good ideas, right? So, but I often think sometimes when it comes to ideas, again, I'm of the opinion that ideas are never far off, other ideas. Probably, if you scan, the average Nigerian youth today, or the average Nigerian workforce, everyone has got some idea and if we were to bucket those ideas, into different categories, we find the ideas very similar to each other. And all that. So where the difference is coming is as the personalities, how people's experience have shaped those ideas and all that. But from the point of execution, once you start executing, I think there comes to be some kind of convergence around how those ideas can turn into solutions, right? Because, for instance, you might have an idea to tackle a specific problem in a place like Nigeria, but in terms of how to solve that problem, you find out that there's only so much options because of either lack of infrastructure, lack of high quality skills, and all that, lack of funding. So you find that there'll be a bit more convergence around how to solve these ideas than the varieties of ideas around trying to solve a particular problem. Right? So yeah, I think for me, there's all kinds of ideas. So hence, particularly if you're an investor like we do at the early stage, is probably weighted more around the founder's ability to actually execute that idea. So we tend to want to see some bit of traction, what you've done so far, and how does that show us that you know what you're doing, and then also what do you have what are some assets that's going to help you take that next step. And sometimes those assets could be, your experience, your network, knowledge, where you're based, and all those sort of things, right? So yeah, the idea is one of them, but then there's also the ability to execute, and the assets that will help you actually execute those things that we also look at as well.
Right. And so, what do you think founders should do to position themselves for potential investors?
This one is an interesting question because I'm probably going to answer this from my own perspective as a founder, right?
Yeah.
So when I founded AlumUnite, at the time it was a vision. We hadn't built anything. I think we just tried a way to find a way to tell a story. Did a video to capture that story, and we
What is
went
that
and
story?
start.
Could you explain
Yes,
what it's about first so that
what
everybody has
AlumUnite is
a
about.
background? Yes.
Yes. So essentially, AlumUnite is a data startup that is solving the who pays for education problem in Africa. I think we've seen lots of issues where, even from the investor side, I always laugh when I speak to other investors and I ask about their thesis and I ask what about education. They're like, like how bad with everything education is doing to investors. Um, so, just judging fairly around, what's happening in the edtech space, even globally, right? There's not so many there aren't that many successes globally in edtech compared to like fintechs and like. But now coming back to Africa and Nigeria, where we actually need the effect of the impact of quality education because of our
Mm-hmm.
youth, growing population, young population, then you find out that it's even worse, unfortunately. And that the issue there is because whilst there's the potential, whilst there are people, the youth that need quality education, there's just not the ability to pay for it. Right? Education is not
Yeah.
something that you see the return in the short term. So people will always prioritize for the bottom of their basic needs, food, shelter, and the
Yeah.
likes. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, what AlumUnite is doing is we are creating micro communities around every school. So essentially, every school in Africa focusing on post-primary to allow us to implement it properly. Every school has its own micro community, and that community is made up of its current students, its staff, so teachers and staff, and the alumni.
Yeah.
So when we was by converting every school to a micro community, we are creating this operating system where we can bring transparency into the school's needs and what it would take to solve those needs, and then leveraging those communities as agents of governance to actually execute the needs. Now, when by doing this, what we're doing is we're just creating a channel for funding to reach those needs directly. Right? So today, funding comes from the top down, through a system that is very inefficient, right? But we are creating this system where funding can go directly to schools. And we've sort of mapped out various avenues where this funding can come from. I think, for instance, there's data that suggests that the funding required for Africa to really develop its potential in education is about $100 billion. So
Oh,
there's this $100 billion gap that needs to go into Africa's education annually for
yeah.
Africa's education to meet the standards to actually, essentially build its human capital. Now, do we believe that that funding is available to, and I think the answer is yes. Would that funding sitting today go into education? The answer is no. So what do we need to
Mm-hmm.
do to get that funding into education? And that's what alumni is doing, building it in a scalable way. So we're not, creating an NGO where we're going to put a booth in every school and send somebody to every school. So we're creating a tech solution that allows schools in Africa, wherever they are, to be able to, attract funding. And then we work with partners, edtech, small businesses, and the likes to implement those needs. So essentially, it's just like a massive operating system where you're turning every school to a micro community, and you're leveraging those communities to identify their needs, curate execution of those needs, and then report impact. So it's essentially like a massive operating system. So
So
yeah,
essentially,
AlumUnite is
okay, go
yeah.
on. Let me allow you to
No, so,
finish.
so I was saying, so hence AlumUnite, is a tech company solving the education financing problem. So I've
Okay.
seen that
So
oftentimes where people view AlumUnite as an ed tech, and and for that reason, investors were like, edtech, come. But I'm also curious to hear, again, how you view that, right? Like I always tend to ask people, let me know, is it an edtech for you, or is it what would you call it?
okay, your description made me feel like it was a marketplace where you are you are linking people in the education space with funding. So you're creating a community of of schools or educational institutions, and you're curating and allowing them to form their specific needs, and then you have put all of them in one place so that potential investors who are keen on investing in that sector can find them more easily than they would ordinarily. So and you're using tech to enable that investigation so that everything is in one place. If you are a potential investor and that is your focus area, all you need to do is log onto your
Yeah.
app or your website and then
Yeah.
find those kind of institutions. My only question would then be, how are these institutions verified? As in, what's the comfort level for the investor to know that a level of due diligence has been done before they decide to invest in those kind of businesses that they see on
Yeah.
your app or your website?
Yeah. Great question. Now, and just before I answer that question, I'm going to ask if you've heard about, Donors Choose. So Donors Choose was a similar concept. I think the founder appeared on Oprah's show, Oprah Winfrey's show in the US,
Okay.
a couple of years back, and I think their platform broke because everybody was flooding to give. But essentially, their concept where they created this platform where teachers from K to 12 schools in the US can submit their needs, challenges for funding, and people can just go on the platform and pay for those, fund those needs, right? So you can think of that as the very basic version of what we're doing, right? So
Okay.
that's for us, we think is the super basic version. And why is that basic? Right? In the US, that works. You can trust the teachers of every school to go in there, put in the needs and all that. In Africa, we know that people would see two sides of that side. Some people will see, okay, the real intention side, other people will see another angle to take advantage of it. So for us, it's about building something that can actually instill trust. I think there's this lack of trust that just kind of push everybody away from education. So which means we've created products. One of them is a mobile app. One of them is a dashboard, which can allow us to do different things. So in the first place, anyone can submit any need about their school, right? So you can submit a need about your secondary school or even a school in your community where you did not attend. Now, users of our mobile app who have been tagged against their schools, you register, you sign up, you select every school you attended, and
Yeah.
then you are sort of put in those communities. At the moment a need is submitted against your school, you get that in your feed, and then you can validate those needs. So current students of the schools will see the needs, past alumni staff who are tagged to the school will see the needs, and then they will validate, right? Some might say, this is scam. I don't want. We don't need
Okay.
water borehole or something, right? So they are creating
Okay.
that second validation. And there's a third validation, which is now putting your money where your mouth is, right? So for a lot of our donor partners, what we are saying to them is for every dollar you bring, we could potentially match it with, 50 cents from the alumni of the schools. So the point is, if your focus as a donor is water access, we can aggregate all the needs across all the schools on our platform that are specifically for water, and then we can bring them to you and say, hey, these are the needs, that are the ones that have been second layer verified by their alumni and all that. This is the impact because we have data about the schools already. We can tell you
Yeah.
this is the number of students who will be impacted by this, that, or that. And then we can also say, hey, obviously, every donor will have limited budget, right? You don't have to solve for every school or every problem. But what we can do is you can bring a budget for the first 100 schools that actually show skin in the game. And what that skin in the game is, the alumni might need to bring 10% of the funding to unlock that. Right? So if the alumni of those schools willing to bring their money, it shows that that need is a valid enough reason. And we and alumni have actually worked with alumni over the last few years to actually validate that alumni are willing to give back. We've solved multiple projects fully funded by alumni, raised over $100,000 doing this sort of thing just with alumni groups. So we believe alumni are always willing to support where they see. So now we're taking to that next step where you as a donor, you are not putting your money there for lack of trust. Now we're giving you a system that actually creates trust and also allows alumni to match. So for the donor, for instance, your impact claims could be over 100%, right? So you put $1 million on alumni and bring 200K. You could put an impact claim of $1.2 million just because you started that flywheel effect, right?
Okay.
And same goes for the alumni as well, right? You brought
Mm-hmm.
200K, and then the overall cost of the project is 1.2 million. Five x, 6x. So you can claim that your $2 gave an impact that's five times more, or thereabouts, 5, 6 times more. And that's the kind of flywheel effect that we're creating, where everybody who's willing to put their money where their mouth is gets much more valued than a singular dollar they're putting in.
Okay, so
So,
I have
so
a
I guess
question.
that. Mhm.
Okay. So in building this business, who do you target? The schools or the alumni? What do you do first?
We usually would target the alumni first. So what we iterated various things and all that, right? So what we realize is whoever has the checks tends to have a say, right? So if the alumni have funding ready to do work in their school, the schools usually respond. Right? So we've learned this because we've done some projects funded by the alumni. If we go knocking on a school and say, hey, your alumni has actually dedicated X amount money sitting in accounts, they want us to come and solve any problem you have, the schools open their doors. Like this is from private schools, public schools. Because I mean, let's face it, if you're a teacher, you're a principal in the school, there's nothing worse than you trying to impact knowledge in kids and not having any resources. And then when you
Yeah.
see a chance to get those resources, you turn it back. Hey, why would you? But then obviously these guys are stretched, like the teachers and all that, they are stretched. So if you're coming to them to ask for data and all that, without giving them something, then you are essentially a distraction. So hence we are shifting away from this, model where we are sending people to schools and going to disrupt. We come to the school when we have something to offer, right? But that being said, we already have data on most of these schools, anyways. So what we will typically go for the school for, we already have it. And what even the new information we might need, we've designed the process to get that information without, being less disruptive, right? So using mobile phone through the app to submit, insights, photos, videos, things that people do on social media every day, right? So we're essentially just tapping into the same behaviors that people use on social media today. Everybody posts photo or video very easily. So we are tapping into those behaviors to essentially collect the information we need about the schools. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm curious. So how do you find alumni? Every school can have alumni, but it's not every alumni that will be active or even have the financial capacity to give back. So how do you do that? Do you just let me not preempt you. How do you do that?
Yeah. So you're right. Every alumni have their role to play. For some people, they will be the ones that give insights, right? They give feedback about what's happening, the challenges on the ground, and that's very valuable.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's even more valuable than. Yeah. So for others where they don't have time, all they have is money. We've seen in the past the alumni that will write a check of $1 million to University of Ibadan, for instance, and then they walk
Mm-hmm.
away. That's it. So there are those categories, right? And then there's everyone in between. Some who would once in a while give money. Sometimes there are those who actually, these alumni actually have businesses. Sometimes the businesses rely on us being able to create projects, funded projects that they can go and execute. So there are
Okay.
those who hang around because, hey, I know my business produces, does borehole. So whenever it's funding ready, I'm ready to put my hands up, right? So there are different values we bring to different parts of the alumni. I see you smiling because you might have
Okay.
one of those businesses sitting around. But
I'm thinking
yeah,
about it.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. That
You-
that makes sense. That makes sense. So my question would then be, when you've identified the alumni, identified what the needs are, how do you then now link matching investments from external donors? How do you marry that together? And then also, is your focus tertiary institutions or secondary institutions? Where do you focus on the
Yeah, so
most?
let me just start. So we focus on secondary and above, so secondary institutions and tertiary.
Okay.
Now we've left primary because we believe the alumni social capital is usually not
Is
as
low.
strong in the primary level.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Having said that, our process still can help primary education, right? Either from attracting funding or helping to aggregate school data and all that. But for us, that's a long term play. So
Mm-hmm.
immediate focus is secondary schools and above, where there's a bit more social capital from the alumni and the likes. In terms of how we attract funding, right? So, like I said, people have always viewed education as education, right? If you're doing anything in education, they're solving SDG 4 goals, right?
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case, right? So, what we are doing now is, like I said, we've created a highway that allows us to get data from schools and alumni. And then what we're doing with that data is we're now stripping that apart. So we're building this AI model where no matter whether you're submitting text, videos, photos, we pull out information from those to enrich the different challenges schools have. So, and then we break those challenges into the other SDG goals from, number 1 to 7, renewable energy, to, 5, gender, to healthcare, number 3. So for example, if we have, let's say we have 2,000 public schools in Lagos today, thereabouts. Um, those schools technically should all have a functioning sick bay, a clinic, right,
Yeah.
for first aid. Now, how many of those schools do have it, right? So if you're a donor where your focus is healthcare, purely healthcare, we can essentially enable or ensure that sick bays in all those thousands of schools are properly furnished and supplied. So this now you're solving an SDG 3 healthcare problem in education. So
Yeah.
like I said, this is how we find the donors, right? Donors usually have a narrow focus. We give them the narrow focus, but within education.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't go to them with solving education. We tell them we are solving health sick bay problems in schools.
Okay.
We are solving problems around hiring quality nurses in schools, this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, for them, maybe their outcomes might be improving, reducing mortality, or improving quality of life. It's still the same thing. Whether you're doing it for young
Yeah.
kids in schools or you're doing it for in public hospitals. So
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially how we essentially bring this funding in, right? So essentially, in the past, you might have been looking at it like, oh, this is the funding available for education. But now we're actually tapping into every funding available for every other impact area because of how we're able to essentially break down
Break
the
things
needs of
down,
schools. Exactly.
which is a fantastic idea. But I remember something you said at the beginning of our conversation about having many ideas, but you've narrowed it down to this particular one. So could you describe that process? How do you sift through different ideas and find the one that is the one? How did you finally narrow down that this is the sector I want to play in, and this is what I want to scale?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's one of those things that you just know once you find yourself doing something that even you don't get paid for, is a very tough chance of tackling that. But you know that if you're able to tackle it, it makes a really big impact, right? I think that's for me, that's just been the driving factor. And I think also I see myself being a product of a very diverse education setting, right? Some people might not know this about me, but I was brought up with public schools, private schools all over Nigeria. Born in the north, I went to school in Kaduna, Kanu, in Abuja. Came down to Warri, and then finally did my uni in Owerri. So there's all this mix of schools that shaped who I am today. And even
Mm-hmm.
when I moved to Australia, I think that's ability to adapt that I've become from being able to different schools allowed me to adapt to the new country where I had no one at the end of the world. And I think it's helped me realize that that's an asset that we need to cherish and hold on to, right? I see people where now we're all growing up, we're having kids, and I ask myself again, given the jackpot return jackpot, if given the option, would you send your kids to a public school? And most people will say no. But
Mm-hmm.
funny enough, they've been shaped by public schools, and they probably would not change that, right? They would not.
Yeah.
They would, if they were to go back, they would keep that. So these experiences that shaped us, unfortunately, are going to be missed out by most, of our, the younger generations, either
Mm-hmm.
because quality of education has continued to slide downwards, and the likes. So for me, what is pushing me is retaining that kind of experience for the new generation, where people who have the choice of going to private school will choose, you know what, I want my kids to go to this federal school because here they're able to mix up with different, diverse people, make friends, life, what life
Yeah.
has to offer, and then create those sort of resilience that can allow them to survive anywhere, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's for me. That choice is the key thing. That choice that says yes, I'm an American citizen or Canadian citizen, but I choose to go back to Nigeria. I choose for my kids, to go to this public school and learn this X, Y, Z. Is something that I think for me drives me. And also, I also take feedback as well. Sometimes, People tell me like, when I'm talking about alumni, they see how I come alive, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
just say, "Oh, you're talking about alumni." I'm like, yeah, I can see your face, I can see your energy, just like say, so over a period of time that this is something that is almost like a life mission, and it just keeps you going, right? So, but then also there's also this thing I also tell myself, right? Sometimes is the solution, is the need for the solution more important than me being the one to solve it, right? So I kind of use that as a way of just checking. I would like to see this done. Um, Now, there's also the humility that I might not be the best person to do it. So, which means if I find somebody I believe can do it better than myself, I'm willing to sort of work with them to do it right. So I know there's always that. Founders get attached to solving the problem, and you want to be the one to solve the problem and all that. But
Yeah.
there's also that once in a while where you ground yourself that yes, is the need to solve the problem bigger than you being the solver of that problem, right? So I just also
Okay.
use that to ground myself every now and then. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, do you think you've achieved product market fit so far, or you're still evolving?
I wouldn't say we've achieved so far. I think we are not far off.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, obviously we're evolving, right? So when we started building this, AI was sort of far fetched, part of our solution, right? It was nowhere down the track, and now AI is a core part of what we're building, right? So I think we are at this sweet spot now where rather than building, we could have built something 2 years ago and now starting to rewind that and try to implement AI. I guess we're
Yeah.
fortunate also we're trying to find a time where the market is ready for what we're building. So like I said, a big part of what we're doing relies on mobile phones, relies on the community playing a role, contributing, right? So, which meant access to mobile phones, access to data had to be a bit more than it used to be when we started working on this. So, we also decided to take our time and find that best point to actually launch. So, hence, we started with solving different aspects, testing different
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders. So, I think right now, we're sort of seeing this sweet spot where I think all the stakeholders are coming to a realization now that yes, for everything happening in the world, one thing that Africa has is that this youth potential, its young population is not far off, right, from being either an asset or liability. If you look at it from two ways, they could be an asset and solve workforce issues globally if they're properly educated, or they could be a liability where they're not properly educated, not employed, and causing sort of challenges for the home countries and then even for international countries as well. So I think that's that sweet spot right now where we believe the action has to happen now.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm interested in how you're using technology. I know you've said mobile phones, you've mentioned AI. So, how can you be a bit granular? Because I'm really curious about this part, especially the AI part. How does that help or enable the business?
Yeah. So like I said, a big part of what we're doing is actually data, right? Data intelligence. So remember, for us to drive funding to schools, we need to identify their needs. And when you're doing that at a scale of hundreds of thousands of schools across, Africa, then there's only so
Yeah.
much you can, do manually and the likes, right? So this is where something like AI comes in. So we want to get to a point where, at every minute somebody somewhere is submitting a need or challenge in their school. So, which means as those lists are being submitted, artificial intelligence is automatically evaluating them. And by evaluating, I mean properly understanding what the needs are, what is the potential impact, what it would take to solve those needs, right? So, somebody might tell you, hey, you have this challenge, of leaking classroom and all that, and this is what's happening. But what they don't tell you
Sorry,
is
can I
how,
interrupt you?
okay,
Can I interrupt you to ask? So
yeah.
you mean that schools are logging in their challenges and their needs on the internet, and AI is scripting through the net to find these challenges? Is that what you're explaining, or is there a central place that schools go to already to log in their needs? Because I'm just thinking that could be a potential idea if there's a central place where schools can potentially log in their needs. So how does it work?
Yeah, so there's a central place, right? So we have a central channel right now where schools can submit their needs. Anyone can submit a need about any school, right? So you submit the data
And
about the school.
how do schools know about you? How do they know that they can that there's a platform where they can log in it? Sorry, I'm asking you so many
No,
questions.
exactly. This is part of the work that we are looking to do as well in terms of educating the stakeholders, right? So far we've sort of been very lean, using social media, using our channels, which we've built over the years. But also, I think we are also getting to a point now where we're building more stronger partnerships. A couple of names in the pipeline, international organizations that we are in discussions with, and those would really help, right? It's credibility with getting the message out there, which means people can submit more needs, right? So if you think about it now, two people can submit. We are both attending the same school, and we can describe the same problem in different ways, right? Somebody might say the classroom is getting flooded without saying how or why. One person might say there's a leaking roof. Another person might say there's a broken window. But
Okay.
it's essentially the same problem. They need to just essentially upgrade the classroom. So this is where artificial intelligence comes in, because sometimes it's how do you know? Do you just solve for one window, or do you just fix the leaking roof, or are there? So you just go. So this is where you pull in so many different views on the same problem, and then use that to build one holistic solution. And that's where artificial intelligence can come in, right? Then there are other aspects as well, as we continue to gather these insights, gather users who are sometimes students and then progress to become alumni of secondary schools or students of higher institutions and so on and so forth, right? So there's the intelligence that we can also generate around what curriculum is actually driving the needle, right? Think about it that way. For instance, what kind of schools are actually making impact, right? I think as kids, we all have this debate where we debated, single sex schools and better than co-ed schools and those sort of things, right? I'm not sure if you had those sort of debates, but for me, I felt like every primary school I went to or secondary school I went to, there was always that debate, single sex versus co-ed school. But today,
I
who
went to
knows,
a
right?
mixed school anyway.
Okay, so I went to both at different times. But then, like today, like who actually has data to actually really has critical data to actually make move the needle in terms of how those things shape economies, right? And one way we could do that is understanding how the schools converge, understanding how they support each other, understanding how they give back to their schools, understanding how they progress through our pipeline. Right? You sign up as a secondary school student, you add a university, 2 years after graduation, then you move somewhere, you get a job, and you see how that converts to your ability to give back. Right? So those are data points that actually can help shift economies, that can help decide. This school, Ogun State, for instance, is an agricultural community, and the curriculum in secondary schools is teaching XYZ. Can we just focus the curriculum there and make sure that this is right? So those sort of things, policy decisions, are things that can come from the data that we generate from our
Right.
platform. So, like I said, the bigger play is data intelligence that can help solve much more macro problems. And it's not just about getting every school better, it's understanding what the schools need to be teaching, what curriculums need to be taught where, and how does the workforce move through that pipeline, right? So I think for us, that's the bigger play where we can actually work to get with the likes of the World Bank, other international organizations to use that data and solve core problems that's for Africa. So that's
Okay.
something we're trying to do as well that hasn't been done or haven't been done at the scale that we're looking to do in the past. So yeah.
Right. And how are you funding this business? I'm asking because we've delved very much into your startup, and I had so many questions to ask, but I'm happy in the direction it's going. So how do you fund? And maybe you could give us an idea of sources of funding that other entrepreneurs can go to for their own
Yeah.
startup ideas. Mhm.
Yeah, so there was this idea. So I started AlumUnite right after my MBA. I did my MBA in Spain, Barcelona.
Okay.
And I had really good support from then my entrepreneurship lecturer. He's French, Professor Matthew. Still have a good relationship with him. And then the idea we pitched it in class. And then it was a very different idea when I pitched it. I think then it was something around almost like a LinkedIn or kind of Facebook solution when we pitched Alumni. But I think he understood where I was coming from. He understood the challenge I was trying to solve. So he sort of always supported me. And one of the best advice he gave me then was to focus on pitching to investors that really understand the problem I'm trying to solve. So, and that was, for me, that was like the best idea ever. Right? There was no point wasting my time going to pitch to VCs, that did not have no clue what the problem was and what the solution, what solving that problem would mean for Africa. Right? So I just literally focused my effort on pitching to alumni. So we raised our first, I think we went out to raise $100,000 in 2019, and we raised just over $100,000 as of early 2020. And we're all from Africa alumni, folks, who had gone through our school system, most of them in the US, UK, and all that. And these were not just Nigerians, a mix of Nigerians, Ghanaians, and the likes. So again, that's another validation, right? So if an investor is someone that is a potential customer or partner in your business, it's the extra validation that this person sees you not just from the investment perspective, but also the business side. That was a strong validation that yes, we're building something that's or potentially that we're solving a problem that they could identify with. And since then, I think we got another check from probably we got our first institutional check from a VC who was Africa focused, again, led by an African. But even at the time when we're not looking for funding, he found us and invested in us. Now that was for us to sort of go test the market, understand how to build this and all that. So which is what we've done over the years, focusing on just working with alumni groups, understanding the dynamics of alumni groups. Because for us, they were a big part of scaling our solution, right? Which is why also the name comes AlumUnite. Right? So we've done that. We've seen how alumni groups have work operates. We see the limitations with alumni groups. They have limitations. So now we sort of, really now over the last year, it was kind of almost like a repivot in terms of our approach. Now we know the role alumni is going to play. We know where the funding is going to come from. So we've sort of done this repivot, and then now this year was all about taking that next step. Right?
Okay, right.
Yeah, your other question about where, again, I guess in that I've sort of answered the question about where founders can get their funding from. I'd say, before, if you're a founder solving a very local problem, in Africa and Nigeria, you probably at best trying to test that with angels, family, and friends who really understand that problem. Sometimes how far you can go out of your immediate network to raise funding would also inform you or give you insight into how people connect with that problem. If it's a problem that is very unique to your local community, chances are maybe you might just raise funding from people who are from the community, maybe one or two who think that problem is big enough. But oftentimes, you also get a sense of, how people view the problem and all that. So, and at the end of the day, sometimes fundraising is also storytelling, right? You tell a story that people can connect with, right? So it's not just, you might have a great idea, but if you're not able to tell a compelling story, people might not be able to buy into it. So there's that aspect as well.
How do you sell yourself? How do you tell a compelling story? Because I feel that most people struggle with articulating their value or the value of their business in a concise way that anybody that listens to them can immediately understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, well, this is where you have to practice and test what you're saying with different stakeholders, right? But I think oftentimes as well, people look beyond what you're saying. People look at your journey. So there's the aspect of telling your story or telling or saying what you want people to hear about you, but also sometimes people look beyond that to see your journey, right? So, so I guess for me, on one hand, while I was telling a story and I wanted to come back and solve a problem, I think I could also show how I'd lived that problem, how that problem has kind of shaped me, and how solving that problem connected with me personally. So it's something that's, yes, it has to come out in the story, but also it's difficult to hide if that's not real.
What are the challenges you faced building your startup, and how have you surmounted them?
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the major challenges has been, funding. And now I'll say funding from two perspectives, right? So the thing with building a startup is you do not want to take too much fund up front, because at that point you're still experimenting, trying to find product market fits, and taking too much funds upfront means you are diluting yourself,
Yeah.
which is not a good. So from that perspective, like we took what we thought was enough. It wasn't funding for me to sort of pay myself, and it was more just set up a team, build a very simple MVP product and do some tests, right? So in that regards, I think that was fine, right, for a time period. Then there was a second stage where I felt, okay, it was time for me to come in full time and really help take us to that next level. But for that level, the funding required now was a little bit more, I guess, was a bit higher. But then we had to manage that with where we are. So you kind of going to pitch to investors to raise $500,000 or $1 million, and they're looking at, hey, this is where you are. You need to show me revenues of this to this, right? So that's kind of like the kind of chicken and egg problem, right? And I think sometimes this problem is kind of unique to Africa, where unfortunately, you get, because of limited funding, funds find much more businesses with much more traction. So if you're building something that is easy to monetize from day one, you tend to get funding much more than if you're building something that the monetization pathway is not
Clear.
as quick, right? So I think from that regard as well, that also meant I had to find a way to reduce the funding required to take us to the next level, and that was part of the reason why I moved back, to move back to Nigeria over the last few years, right? So again, it was a calculated move, right? So I moved back to Nigeria with McKinsey, worked a couple of years there, and then we transitioned out, into Catalyst Fund, on the VC side. What all this has done is kind of help me, use my cost of living, reduce, essentially, which was the barrier. It's either you reduce the cost of living or you find a way to increase the fund you can raise. So I decided to solve for the one that would do much more within my control. Right? So reduce my cost of living, came into the markets, be closer to stakeholders. And that meant that, being able to do much more with much less funds versus if I was still building this from where I was, right? So that's another way I've kind of also solved that financing gap by coming closer to the markets, being in a space where the cost of living was much lower. But then there are other challenges that come with that as well. But I think for me, just in terms of managing that funding aspect, that's how I've been able to manage.
Okay. And in the long term, how do you hope to generate revenues for the business so that it can scale?
Yeah. Long term, what we're looking to do is essentially work with these donor organizations that typically have budgets to solve and looking for impact, right? So essentially, what we're putting in front of them is literally the most efficient impact investment they can make in terms of, for every dollar that goes towards your focus area of impact, potentially you get 100% or more worth of the impact. This is because the alumni matches that, right? So this is not something that has been done or has been done at scale.
Yeah.
So which means, now we're coming with a very solid value proposition to a lot of these impact donors to say, we can do a lot more with your dollars, and sort of just automate that whole impact reporting process for you. So you don't have to wait 6 months or 1 year for us to write a report about what we've done. You see that in near real time, right? Because we plug into that data space where you're seeing that needs are moving from schools, funds are being raised by alumni to match, and your project are executed. You just see that in kind of real time. You as a donor, you're more incentivized to go to the next level. If your first budget was $100,000, probably your next budget is $1 million, and then 10x from there, because you can see the impact, and you can see that pretty much for every dollar you give, you get $1 back worth of impact or more, right? Same goes for the alumni as well. And we've kind of mapped out these various go-to markets for each side that ensures that they, get the most bang for their buck. And in terms of how we make money, right? So in between all those fund flows, like we take a commission. So as AlumUnite, we take a commission. So that's essentially, the revenue model. There are other things, revenue models that are around the data aspect as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Do you have any parting words or wisdom for people that have watched or will watch this episode today?
So I think for me, it's more a call to action, right? That's Africa as it is right now. is not going to be built by anyone else besides we Africans, right? So I'm going to say this from me, the founder side, and from alumni side is yes, we're always looking for support, right? In terms of whether you want to put your school out there and say what your school needs, or you want to come in there because you have businesses that can solve the needs that your school have identified, or you want to just give funds, right? So you're working abroad, and you have no time, you want to find a transparent way to contribute. And I'd even say, like in the future, part of our roadmap is leveraging experts from our communities to fill in the gaps. Right? We know we have shortages of teachers, shortages of expertise. So part of our roadmap is filling in mentorship and some of those gaps where people can volunteer their time, and we kind of provide this concierge and make sure they can deliver, knowledge, impact knowledge on the younger generation. So that's part of where essentially the call to action for everyone to unite and work in this space. For fellow founders, again, the grind is tough, right? I know I've seen things from different angles where, probably for the same efforts you're putting down here in Africa, for those in maybe North America, it's much easier to get funding and the likes. But all I'll say is, make sure you have a strong connection to the problem you're solving, because that's what will fuel you in the tough days, right? And there's going to be those tough days. Again, in terms of trying to raise funding, focus your effort on people that really understand the problem first. That makes sure you're putting your effort and time into pitching to the right people, right? Because generally, investors want to make money, but then there are investors who want to make money, but also want the problem that they feel to be solved. Those are the ones we want to start with. And overall, I guess I think this is probably the best time to build with the AI revolution and everything happening right now. You can get a lot more done with fewer resources. I would say, if you have ideas and you've been shelving it and putting it aside, then this is probably the time to say, what, take that idea out, execute it, test it, and see where it goes. You always learn something out of it.
Wow, fantastic. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey as a founder, as an investor. And I'm sure it is something that everybody would look forward to watching and listening to over and over and over again. Thank
Thanks
you.
so much, Jimmy. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.